Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
It is Friday. And all of our guests today, including Thomas Drance, standing by, brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Looking for a midweek escape close to home? BC residents save 15% on weekday stays at the Bayside Oceanfront Resort in Parksville. Relax by the ocean, enjoy great dining, and unwind with island hospitality. Book now at BaysideResortParksville.com. We're joined now from The Athletic by Thomas Drance, as always on a Friday. How are you, sir?
Gentlemen, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I can't remember if you've answered this question, but what the heck, I'll ask it anyway. Just where are you when it comes to the possibility of Manny Malhotra replacing Rick Tocket as head coach of the Canucks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little soon. I'll be honest with you. I think it's a little soon. But if you wanted to make the argument, if the organization wanted to make the argument that, look, regardless of experience, you've seen the work that this guy did in his first chance as a professional head coach. It was electric. He's a genius. He's the right guy for the job. And whether the timing is perfect or not, in an ideal world, we maybe he'd get a couple more years of seasoning. But we don't live in an ideal world. And after investigating our options, we determined that this was the right guy for the job. I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, his work at the American League level has been pretty much undeniable. You think about, Lekaramäki's development down in the AHL this year, Ratu's progress. You think about how Elias Pettersson has come along, the readiness of all the players at the NHL level that the club called up, especially down the stretch, and how they fit in, how prepared they were. Malhotra replaced like an elite American League coach in Jeremy Colleton. This was his first year as a head coach at the professional level, at any level. Like he's never been a head coach. And for him to have accomplished all that, for all of Vancouver's developmental prospects to have improved or progressed or tracked in a positive direction, and for the team to have had success, including playoff success. I mean, they have a chance to advance another round in the Calder Cup playoffs tonight against the Coachella Valley Firebirds. That's a pretty unassailable resume. So the only sort of hole you can poke in it is, hey, ideally we'd be 2 years in the future by the time we're considering this. But it looks like the club made a really sharp bet when they opted to hire Malhotra in the first place last summer. He's exceeded all reasonable expectations in his first year. And if the argument was, hey, this is the right guy, we think he's going to continue to exceed our expectations, I'd buy it because, frankly, we saw it. Like, I had experienced concerns about Malhotra this year that proved unfounded. So, this is just a quality hockey guy, was as a player, appears to have been as an assistant coach, and certainly has been in his first year managing a bench in the A. I like the profile overall, even if I think it's a little bit soon and a little bit of a difficult spot to put a relatively inexperienced head coach in, all things considered.
Seattle is showing some serious interest in Rick Tocket. I don't know what the reaction in this city would be if he ends up 2 hours down the highway. Like, I mean, it would it not be crazy? Rick Tocket in Seattle for 5 years?
That would be unbelievable. I mean, then we'd really have a rivalry, right? Then we don't have to. Then we don't have to have Ian Furness sort of straining to
Furness.
Then we wouldn't need Furness to be suggesting that Tyler Myers sleeps in a cage and eats nothing but raw meat, right? Like there'd be an actual reason for a rivalry here. And yeah, I mean, look, the scary thing about that from my perspective, gentlemen, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it, but Seattle, you've got a pretty good starting goaltender in Joey Decord. You've got a pretty deep defense core, a lot of guys with size like Larson and Alexiak, but also some guys that can move the puck and drive play a little bit. You've got 3 centers with speed. You've got a lot of wingers with some defensive know-how, guys like Tolvanen and Eberle and even Capo Caco, who have some defensive chops. I mean, that team feels pretty ready-made to play Tocket hockey and play it pretty well. And to me, that's, not like a scary prospect, but it certainly would raise the floor on a Kraken team that flirted with 80 points. And I think bring them right to the point of being like a real contender to be one of those spoiler wildcard teams in the Western Conference mix. I mean, I think it would be a great fit hockey-wise with where that roster is at the moment. And I think Tocket could probably punch above, the talent weight that lineup has if he were the man down the I-5. So, I mean, we'll see. It would certainly be an interesting one, in terms of really igniting the rivalry, in terms of having tongues wagging in this market. But also from a hockey perspective, I mean, I think it would be a great hire for the Kraken.
Would you do everything possible to keep Adam Foote? He's still in the mix. He could join his good friend Rick Tocket elsewhere. He's going to get interviews for head coaching jobs elsewhere. But I just think keeping this guy would really help for next year, as opposed to 3 or 4 brand new people on the coaching staff.
I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, can you keep him without a promotion? Right? Can you keep him without a promotion? Associate head coach, right? That's something that, if you bring in an experienced guy, could he be an associate head coach? A little pay bump there. Could you keep him with that? I think if that was a realistic route, and I don't think it would be, I think realistically it's going to be head coach, or he'll more likely be on Tocket's staff, right? I mean, that just would be my gut. We know how much head coaches prize having their guy. Foote was Tocket's guy throughout his time in Vancouver. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's where sort of the difficulty arises. I think if it takes promoting Foote to head coach to keep him, then you have to proceed with caution, right? This is a guy who has 0 head coaching experience at the professional level. I don't think that that's a roll of the dice that this team should be excited about sort of doing, given sort of the state of this roster, the stakes of this season. And, in his one season as a head coach, like in contrast with Malhotra, whose one season as a head coach at the AHL level has been a smash success by every category. Foote's one season as a head coach in the WHL with the Kelowna Rockets was not so good, not so positive, right? So I think that would be a huge swing of the bat, and one that I probably would be nervous about if the Canucks decided to go that route. If you're able to keep Foote in any capacity below head coach, I mean, it's clear that he's accomplished an awful lot in this market since taking sort of the assistant coaching job. It's clear that he's a wildly knowledgeable hockey guy, does a great job working with defensemen. We've seen what Tyler Myers has done under sort of Foote's tutelage. We've seen what Zadorov did in the playoffs last year. Obviously, putting Hughes and Hronek together was nothing short of inspired. So keeping a coach who has the respect of his players and has gotten this much out of them is definitely best practice if the club can figure out how to do it. Now, promoting him to head coach, however, I think is a bit of a different question. And I think is something that would make me a little bit more nervous as sort of from the outside looking in at Vancouver Canucks decision-making.
How much fun are you having watching these Stanley Cup playoffs?
Oh.
And is it hard to believe the Canucks were right there with the Oilers after 2 games last year in the second round?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that series was as close, frankly, as the one goal in Game 7 suggests. The Oilers saved 85% of shots faced. Stuart Skinner had a meltdown, and that sort of changed the series in my mind. When it really came down to brass tacks, the Oilers outshot the Canucks 2-1 in Games 6 and 7, and sort of outscored them on an 8-1 run across 5 periods.
They got a huge scare, though, Tom. They got a huge scare.
Yeah,
they got a scare, but the Canucks were only ever close enough for McDavid to break their heart, right? I think that's the truth of it. This team wasn't as close against the Oilers, and were clearly outclassed at the pointy end of that series. Period. I don't know what else to say. You guys watched Game 6 and Game 7 too. Mm-hmm. And so, I sort of look at it and think, right, more than anything, you can get real close in the playoffs, but if you don't have the top end guys taking over games, then you're only ever close enough to have your heart broken. The Colorado Avalanche, I mean, how close were they to beating the Dallas Stars? And then Mikko Rantanen goes absolutely nuke against them. You can't get much closer than the Blues did against the Winnipeg Jets, but the Jets pulled it out of the fire. Their team attacking Game 6 on 5 sort of helped them overcome. And, I think there's a lesson in that. You need a top end. You need a dynamic top end more than anything else. And I think that's sort of what's interesting about this Stars story in particular for me, looking forward to that game tonight, is, the Stars, Miro Heiskanen was injured in late January, right? They knew that Miro Heiskanen was iffy to be part of their playoff run, and they still were willing to push in a ton of assets, right? Stankoven, multiple firsts to land Rantanen. And it was like, they understood, I think, that, hey, maybe this is a risk that we're not going to be at our absolute best going into the playoffs, right? Like if we were going to build the most complete team, we'd probably be trying to upgrade our defense, bring in a right-handed defenseman to sort of patch the gap as we wait for our best defender to get back into the lineup. And instead, they sort of did something similar to what Florida did, I think, with the Matthew Tkachuk deal, where they were willing to take a short-term step back to raise their ceiling for the long term. And this is a Stars team that's been one of those striver class sides, you know, punching above their weight and going deep into the playoffs until they bump into a Kucherov or an Eichel or a McDavid and end up flat. And they were willing to sort of swing for the fences in landing that top superstar level talent that could sort of bring them to a next level, even if that came at the expense of sort of their floor in the short term. And what we're seeing in these playoffs, and what I think we're seeing regularly these days, is it's such a star-driven league that actually throwing aside like classic ideas about depth and team construction and just focusing on having as many dudes, as many math-bending, game-breaking, superstar-level players on your roster as possible is kind of what matters most at this time of year. And I think the Stars have been a fascinating sort of test case of where the game is evolving and how star-driven it's become, much like the Oilers with McDavid and Draisaitl have been across the last few years, and frankly, much like the Florida Panthers have been ever since they acquired Matthew Tkachuk. So that's been sort of one of the major thoughts percolating in my mind as I've watched these Stanley Cup playoffs. The product could not be in a better place. I mean, these games are thrilling on a night-to-night basis.
Absolutely, and you talk about top-end talent coming through. You know, McDavid and Draisaitl last night in Vegas in overtime. Amazing. Thomas, thanks for this, sir. Have a great weekend.
Gentlemen, be well.